Chapter 18. Oldring's Knell. Some 40 hours or more later, Veneers created a commotion in the cottonwoods by riding down the main street on Black Star and leading Bells and Night. He had come upon Bells grazing near the body of a dead rustler, the only incident of his quick ride into the village. Nothing was farther from Veneers' mind than bravado. No thought came to him of the defiance and boldness of riding Jane Withersteen's racers straight into the arch-plotter's stronghold. He wanted men to see the famous Arabians. He wanted men to see them dirty and dusty, bearing all the signs of having been driven beyond their limit. He wanted men to see and to know that the thieves who had ridden them out into the sage had not ridden them back. Veneers had come for that and more. He wanted to see Toll face to face, if not Toll, then Dyer, if not Dyer, then anyone in the secret of these master conspirators. Such was Veneers' passion. The meeting with the rustlers, the unprovoked attack upon him, the spilling of blood, the recognition of Jerry Card and the horses, the race, and that last plunge of mad wrangle. All these things, fuel on fuel to the smoldering fire, had kindled and swelled and leaped into living flame. He could have shot Dyer in the midst of his religious services at the altar. He could have killed Toll in front of the wives and babes. He walked the three racers down the broad, green-bordered village road. He heard the murmur of running water from Amber Spring. Bitter waters for Jane Witherstein. Men and women stopped to gaze at him and the horses. All knew him, all knew the blacks in the bay, as well as if it had been spoken. Veneers read in the faces of men the intelligence that Jane Withersteen's Arabians had been known to have been stolen. Veneers reined in and halted before Dyer's residence. It was a low, long, stone structure resembling Withersteen House. The spacious front yard was green and luxuriant with grass and flowers. Gravel walks led to the huge porch. A well-trimmed hedge of purple sage separated the yard from the church grounds. Birds sang in the trees, water flowed musically along the walks, and there were glad, careless shouts of children. For Veneers, the beauty of this home and the serenity and its apparent happiness all turned red and black. For Veneers, a shade overspread the lawn, the flowers, the old vine-clad stone house. In the music of the singing birds, in the murmur of running water, he heard an ominous sound. Quiet beauty, sweet music, innocent laughter. By what monstrous abortion of fate could these abide in the shadow of Dyer? Veneers rode on and stopped before Toll's cottage. Women stared at him with white faces and then flew from the porch. Toll himself appeared at the door, bent low, craning his neck. His dark face flushed out of sight. The door banged. A heavy bar dropped with a hollow sound. Then Veneers shook Black Star's bridle, and, sharply trotting, led the other horses to the center of the village. Here at the intersecting streets and in front of the stores he halted once more. The usual lounging atmosphere of that prominent corner was not now in evidence. Riders and ranchers and villagers broke up what must have been absorbing conversation. There was a rush of many feet, and then the walk was lined with faces. Veneers' glance swept down the line of silent, stone-faced men. He recognized many riders and villagers, but none of those he had hoped to meet. There was no expression in the faces turned toward him. All of them knew him, most were inimical, but there were few who were not burning with curiosity and wonder in regard to the return of Jane Withersteen's racers. Yet all were silent. Here were the familiar characteristics, masked feelings, strange secretiveness, expressionless expression of mystery and hidden power. "Has anybody here seen Jerry Card?" queried Veneers in a loud voice. In reply there came not a word, not a nod or shake of head, not so much as dropping eye or twitching lip, nothing but a quiet, stony stare. "Been under the knife?" "You're a fine knife wielder here. One Toll, I believe. Maybe you've all had your tongues cut out?" This passionate sarcasm of Veneers brought no response, and the stony calm was as oil on the fire within him. "I see some of you pack guns, too," he added in biting scorn. In the long, tense pause, strung keenly as a tight wire, he sat motionless on Black Star. "All right," he went on. "Then let some of you take this message to Toll. Tell him I've seen Jerry Card. Tell him Jerry Card will never return." Thereupon, in the same dead calm, Veneers backed Black Star away from the curb and into the street and out of range. He was ready now to ride up to Withersteen House and turn the racers over to Jane. "Hello, Veneers!" a familiar voice cried hoarsely, and he saw a man running toward him. It was the rider Judkins who had come up and gripped Veneers' hand. "Veneers, I could have dropped when I seen them hosses, but that sight ain't a marker to the looks of you. What's wrong? Have you gone crazy? You must be crazy to ride in here this way, with them hosses, talking that way about Toll and Jerry Card." "Judd, I'm not crazy, only mad clean through," replied Venners. "Well now, Byrne, I'm glad to hear some of your old self in your voice, for when you come up you looked like the corpse of a dead rider with fire for eyes. You had that crowd too stiff for throwing guns. Come, we've got to have a talk. Let's go up the lane. We ain't much safe here." Judkins mounted Bells and rode with Venners up to the cottonwood grove. Here they dismounted and went among the trees. "Let's hear from you first," said Judkins. "You fetched back them horses, that is the trick. And of course you got Jerry the same time as you got Horn." "Horn? Sure, he was found dead yesterday, all chewed up by coyotes, and he'd been plumb shot center." "Where was he found?" "At the split down the trail, you know, where Oldring's cattle trail runs off north from the trail to the pass. That's where I met Jerry and the rustlers." "What was Horn doing with them?" "I thought Horn was an honest cattleman." "Lord, Byrne, don't ask me that. I'm all muddled now trying to figure things." Venners told of the fight and the race with Jerry Card and its tragic conclusion. I knowed it all along that Wrangler was the best hoss," exclaimed Judkins, with his lean face working and his eyes lighting. "That was a race. Lord, I'd like to have seen Wrangler jump the cliff with Jerry." "And that was goodbye to the grandest hoss and rider ever on the sage. But, Byrne, after you got the hosses, why didn't you want to bolt right in Toll's face?" "I want him to know, and if I can get to him, I'll—" "You can't get near Toll," interrupted Judkins. "That vigilante bunch have taken to being bodyguard for Toll and Dyer, too." "Hasn't Lassiter made a break yet?" inquired Venners curiously. "Nah," replied Jenkins scornfully. "Jane has turned his head. He's mad in love over her. Follers her like a dog. He ain't no more Lassiter. He's lost his nerve. He doesn't look like the same feller. It's village talk. Everybody knows it. He hasn't thrown a gun, and he won't." "Judd, I bet he does," replied Venners earnestly. "Remember what I say. This Lassiter is something more than a gunman. Judd, he's big. He's great. I feel that in him. God help Toll and Dyer when Lassiter goes after them, for horses and riders and stone walls won't save 'em." "Well, have it your way, Byrne. I hope you're right. Naturally, I've been some sore on Lassiter for getting soft, but I ain't denying his nerve, or whatever's great in him. That sort of paralyzes people. No later'n this morning I seen him sauntering down the lane, quiet and slow, and like his guns he comes black. Black, that's Lassiter. While the crowd on the corner never batted an eye, and I'll gamble my hoss that there wasn't one who had a heartbeat till Lassiter got by. He went in Snell's saloon, and as there wasn't no gunplay, I had to go in too. And there, darn my pictures, if Lassiter wasn't standing to the bar, drinking and talking with Oldring." "Oldring!" whispered Venners. His voice, all fire and pulse within him, seemed to freeze. "Let go my arm!" exclaimed Jenkins. "That's my bad arm. Sure, it was Oldring. What the hell's wrong with you, anyway? Venners, I tell you, something's wrong. You're whiter than a sheet. You can't be scared of the rustler. I don't believe you've got a scare in you. Well, now, just let me talk. You know I like to talk, and if I'm slow, I always get there sometime. As I said, Lassiter was talky chummy with Oldring. There wasn't no hard feelings. The gang wasn't paying no particular attention, but like a cat watching a mouse, I had my eyes on them two fellers. It was strange to me, that confab. I'm getting to think a lot, for a fellow who doesn't know much. There's been some queer deals lately, and this seemed to me the queerest. These men stood to the bar alone, and so close their big gun hilts butted together. I seen Oldring was some surprised at first, and Lassiter was cool as ice. They talked, and presently, at something Lassiter said, the rustler bawled out a curse, and then he just fell up against the bar and sagged there. The gang in the saloon looked round and laughed, and that's about all. Finally Oldring turned, and it was easy to see something had shook him. Yes, sir, that big rustler, you know he's as broad as he is long, and the powerfulest build of a man. Yes, sir, the nerve had been taken out of him. Then, after a little, he began to talk and said a lot to Lassiter, and by and by it didn't take much of an eye to see that Lassiter was getting hit hard. I never seen him anyway but cooler and ice, till then. He seemed to be hit harder than Oldring, only he didn't roar out that way. He just kind of sunk in, and looked, and he didn't see a living soul in that saloon. Then he sort of come to, and shaking hands, mind you, shaking hands with Oldring, he went out. I couldn't help thinking how easy even a boy could have dropped the great gunman then. Well, the wrestler stood at the bar for a long time, and he was seeing things far off, too. Then he come to and roared for whiskey, and gulped down a drink that was big enough to drown me. "Is Oldring here now?" whispered Veneers. He could not speak above a whisper. Judkin's story had been meaningless to him. "He's at Snell's yet. Burn, I haven't told you yet that the rustlers have been raising hell. They shot up Stonebridge and Glaze, and for 3 days they've been here drinking and gambling and throwing gold. These rustlers have a pile of gold. If it was gold dust or gold nugget, I'd have reason to think. But it's new gold coin, as if it had just come from the United States Treasury. And the gold's genuine, that's all been proved. The truth is, Oldring's on a rampage. A while back he lost his masked rider, and they say he's wild about that. I'm wondering if Lassiter could have told the rustler anything about that little masked, hard-riding devil. Ride, he was almost as good as Jerry Card. And Byrne, I've been wondering if you know—" "Judkins, you're a good fellow," interrupted Veneers. "Some day I'll tell you a story. I've got no time now. Take the horses to Jane." Judkins stared, and then, muttering to himself, he mounted Bells and stared again at Veneers. And then, leading the other horses, he rode into the grove and disappeared. Once long before, on the night Veneers had carried Bess through the canyon and up into Surprise Valley, he had experienced the strangeness of faculties singularly, tinglingly acute. And now the same sensation recurred. It was different in that he felt cold, frozen, mechanical, and capable of free thought. And all about him seemed unreal, aloof, remote. He hid his rifle in the sage, marking its exact location with extreme care. Then he faced down the lane and strode toward the center of the village. Perceptions flashed upon him. The faint, cold touch of the breeze, a cold, silvery tinkle of flowing water, a cold sun shining out of a cold sky, song of birds and laugh of children coldly distant. Cold and intangible were all things in earth and heaven. Colder and tighter stretched the skin over his face. Colder and harder grew the polished butts of his guns. Colder and steadier became his hands as he wiped the clammy sweat from his face or reached low to his gun sheath. Men meeting him in the walk gave him wide berth. In front of Bevan's store a crowd melted apart for his passage, and their faces and whispers were faces and whispers of a dream. He turned a corner to meet Tull face to face, eye to eye. As once before he had seen this man pale to a ghastly livid white, so again he saw the change. Tull stopped in his tracks, with right hand raised and shaking. Suddenly it dropped. He seemed to glide aside to pass out of Veneers' sight. Next he saw many horses with bridles down, all clean-limbed dark bays or blacks. Rustlers' horses. Loud voices and boisterous laughter, rattle of dice and scrape of chair and clink of gold, burst in mingled din from an open doorway. He stepped inside. With the sight of smoke-hazed room and drinking, cursing, gambling, dark-visaged men, reality once again dawned upon Veneers. His entrance had gone unnoticed, and he bent his gaze upon the drinkers at the bar. Dark-clothed, dark-faced men they all were, burned by the sun, bow-legged as were most riders of the sage, neither lean nor gaunt. Then Veneers' gaze passed to the tables, and swiftly it swept over the hard-featured gamesters, all alight with the huge, shaggy black head of the rustler chief. "Oldring!" he cried, and to him his voice seemed to split a bell in his ears. It stilled the din. That silence suddenly broke to the scrape and crash of Oldring's chair as he rose. And then, while he passed, a great gloomy figure. Again the thronged room stilled in silence yet deeper. "Oldring, a word with you," continued Veneers. "Ho, what's this?" boomed Oldring, in frowning scrutiny. "Come outside, alone. A word for you. From your masked rider." Oldring kicked a chair out of his way and lunged forward with a stamp of heavy boot that jarred the floor. He waved down his muttering, rising men. Veneers backed out of the door and waited, hearing, as no sound had ever before struck into his soul, the rapid, heavy steps of the rustler. Oldring appeared, and Veneers had one glimpse of his great breadth and bulk, and his gold-buckled belt with hanging guns, his high-top boots with gold spurs. In that moment Veneers had a strange, unintelligible curiosity to see Oldring alive. The rustler's broad brow, his large black eyes, his sweeping beard as dark as the wing of a raven, his enormous width of shoulder and depth of chest, his whole splendid presence, so wonderfully charged with vitality and force and strength, seemed to afford Veneers an unutterable, fiendish joy, because for that magnificent manhood in life he meant cold and sudden death. "Oldring, Bess is alive, but she's dead to you, dead to the life you made her leave, dead as you will be in 1 second. Swift as lightning, Veneers' glance dropped from Oldring's rolling eyes to his hands. One of them, the right, swept out, then towards his gun, and Veneers shot him through the heart. Slowly, Oldring sank to his knees, and the hand dragging at the gun fell away. Venner's strangely acute faculties grasped the meaning of that limp arm, of the swaying hulk, of the gasping heave, of the quivering beard. But was that awful spirit in the black eyes only one of vitality? "Man, why didn't you wait? Bess was—" Oldring's whisper died under his beard, and with a heavy lurch he fell forward. Bounding swiftly away, Veneers fled round the corner, across the street, and leaping a hedge he ran through the yard, orchard, and garden to the sage. Here, under cover of the tall brush, he turned west and ran on to the place where he had hidden his rifle. Securing that, he again set out into a run, and circling through the sage, came up behind Jane Withersteen's stable and corrals. With laboring, dripping chest, and pain as if a knife thrust in his side, he stopped to regain his breath, and while resting his eyes roved around in search of a horse. Doors and windows of the stable were wide open, and had a deserted look. One dejected, lonely burro stood in the near corral. Strange indeed was the silence brooding over the once happy, noisy home of Jane Withersteen's pets. He went into the corral, exercising care to leave no tracks, and led the burro to the watering trough. Veneers, though not thirsty, drank till he could drink no more. Then, leading the burro over hard ground, he struck into the sage and down the slope. He strode swiftly, turning from time to scan the slope for riders. His head just topped the level of sagebrush, and the burro could not have been seen at all. Slowly the green of cottonwoods sank behind the slope, and at last a wandering line of purple sage met the blue of sky. To avoid being seen, to get away, to hide his trail, these were the sole ideas in his mind as he headed toward Deception Pass, and he directed all his acuteness of eye and ear, and the keenness of a rider's judgment for distance and ground, to stern accomplishment of the task. He kept to the sage far to the left of the trail leading into the pass. He walked 10 miles, and looked back 1,000 times. Always the graceful purple wave of the sage remained wide and lonely, a clear, undotted waste. Coming to a stretch of rocky ground, he took advantage of it to cross the trail, and then continued down on the right. At length he persuaded himself that he would be able to see riders mounted on horses before they could see him on the little burro, and he rode bareback. Hour by hour the tireless burro kept to his faithful, steady trot. The sun sank, and the long shadows lengthened down the slope. Moving veils of purple twilight crept out of the hollows, and, mustering and forming on the levels, soon merged and shaded into night. Veneers guided the burro nearer to the trail, so that he could see its white line from the ridges, and rode on through the hours. Once down in the pass without leaving the trail, he could hold himself safe for the time being. When late in the night he reached the break in the sage, he sent the burro down ahead of him, and started an avalanche that all but buried the animal at the bottom of the trail. Bruised and battered as he was, he had a moment's elation, for he had hidden his track. Once more he mounted the burro and rode on. The hour was the blackest of the night when he made the thicket which enclosed his old camp. Here he turned the burro loose in the grass near the spring, and then lay down in his old bed of leaves. He felt only vaguely, as outside things, the ache and burn and throb of the muscles of his body. But a dammed-up torrent of emotion at last burst its bounds, and the hour that saw his release from immediate action was one that confounded him in the reaction of his spirit. He suffered without understanding why. He caught glimpses into himself, into the unlit darkness of soul. The fire that had blistered him and the cold which had frozen him now united in one torturing possession of his mind and heart, and like a fiery steed with ice-shod feet, ranged his being, ran riding through his blood, trampling the resurging good, dragging ever at the evil. Out of the subsiding chaos came a clear question. What had happened? He had left the valley to go to Cottonwoods. Why? It seemed he had gone to kill a man. Oldring, that name riveted his consciousness upon the one man of all men upon earth whom he wanted to meet. He had met the wrestler. Veneers recalled the smoky haze of the saloon, the dark-visaged man, the huge Oldring. He saw him step out of the door, a splendid specimen of manhood, a handsome giant with purple, black, and sweeping beard. He remembered the inquisitive gaze of falcon eyes. He heard himself repeating, "Oldring, Bess is alive, but she's dead to you." And he felt himself jerk, and his ears throbbed to the thunder of a gun, and he saw the giant sink slowly to his knees. Was that only the vitality of him, that awful light in the eyes, only the hard dying life of a tremendously powerful brute? A broken whisper, strange as death. "Man, why didn't you wait? Bess was—" And Oldring plunged forward, dead. "I killed him," cried Veneers in remembering shock. "But it wasn't that. Ah, the look in his eyes and his whisper." Herein lay the secret that had clamored to him through all the tumult and stress of his emotions. What a look in the eyes of a man shot through the heart! It had been neither hate nor ferocity nor fear of men, nor fear of death. It had been no passionate glinting spirit of a fearless foe, willing shot for shot, life for life, but lacking physical power. Distinctly recalled now, never to be forgotten, Venner saw in Oldring's magnificent eyes the rolling of great, glad surprise, softness, love. Then came a shadow and the terrible superhuman striving of his spirit to speak. Oldring, shot through the heart, had fought and forced back death, not for a moment in which to shoot or curse, but to whisper strange words. What words for a dying man to whisper? Why had not Venner's waited? For what? That was no plea for life. It was regret that there was not a moment in life left in which to speak. Bess was. Herein lay renewed torture for Venner's. What had Bess been to Oldring? The old question, like a spectre, stalked from his grave to haunt him. He had overlooked, he had forgiven, he had loved, and he had forgotten. And now, out of the mystery of a dying man's whisper, rose again that perverse, unsatisfied, jealous uncertainty. Bess had loved that splendid black-crowned giant. By her own confession, she had loved him, and in Venner's soul again flamed up the jealous hell. Then into the clamoring hell burst the shot that had killed Oldring, and it rang in a wild, fiendish gladness, a hateful, vengeful joy. That passed to the memory of the love and light in Oldring's eyes and the mystery in his whisper. So the changing, swaying emotions fluctuated in Venner's heart. This was the climax of his year of suffering and the crucial struggle of his life. And when the gray dawn came he rose, a gloomy, almost heartbroken man, but the victor over evil passions. He could not change the past, and, even if he had not loved Bess with all his soul, he had grown into a man who would not change the future he had planned for her. Only, and once for all, he must know the truth, know the worst, stifle all these insistent doubts and subtle hopes and jealous fancies, and kill the past by knowing truly what Bess had been to Oldring. For that matter he knew, he had always known, but he must hear it spoken. Then, when they had safely gotten out of that wild country to take up a new and an absorbing life, she would forget, she would be happy, and through that, in the years to come, he could not but find life worth living. All day he rode slowly and cautiously up the pass, taking time to peer around corners, to pick out hard ground and grassy patches, and to make sure that there was no one in pursuit. In the night sometime he came to the smooth scrawled rocks dividing the valley, and here set the burro at liberty. He walked beyond, climbed the slope in the dim starlit gorge. Then, weary to the point of exhaustion, he crept into a shallow cave and fell asleep. In the morning, when he descended the trail, he found the sun was pouring a golden stream of light through the arch of the great stone bridge. Surprise Valley, like a valley of dreams, lay mystically soft and beautiful, awakening to the golden flood, which was rolling away its slumberous bands of mist, brightening its walled faces. While yet far off, he discerned Bess moving under the silver spruces, and soon the barking of the dogs told him that they had seen him. He heard the mockingbird singing in the trees, and then the twittering of the quail. Ring and Whitey came bounding toward him, and behind them ran Bess, her hands outstretched. "Bern, you're back, she cried in joy that rang of her loneliness. "Yes, I'm back," he said as she rushed to meet him. She had reached out for him when suddenly, as she saw him closely, something checked her, and as quickly all her joy fled, and with it her color, leaving her pale and trembling. "Oh, what happened?" "A good deal has happened, Bess. I don't need to tell you what. And I'm played out, worn out in mind more than body." "Dear, you look strange to me," faltered Bess. "Never mind that. I'm all right. There's nothing for you to be scared about. Things are going to turn out just as we planned. As soon as I'm rested, we'll make a break to get out of the country. Only now, right now, I must know the truth about you." "Truth about me?" echoed Bess shrinkingly. She seemed to be casting back into her mind for a forgotten key. Fenner's himself, as he saw her, received a pang. "Yes, the truth. Bess, don't misunderstand. I haven't changed that way. I love you still. I'll love you more afterward. Life will be just as sweet, sweeter to us. We'll be married as soon as ever we can. We'll be happy. But there's a devil in me, a perverse, jealous devil. Then I've queer fancies. I forgot for a long time. Now all those fiendish little whispers of doubt and faith and fear and hope come torturing me again. I've got to kill them with the truth." "I'll tell you anything you want to know," she replied frankly. Then by heaven, let's have it over and done with. Bess, did Oldring love you? Certainly he did. Did you love him? Of course, I told you so. How can you tell it so lightly? Cried Veneers passionately. Haven't you any sense of... He choked back speech. He felt the rush of pain and passion. He seized her in rude, strong hands and drew her close. He looked straight into her dark blue eyes. They were shadowing with the old wistful light, but they were as clear as the limpid water of the spring. They were earnest, solemn, in unutterable love and faith and abnegation. Veneers shivered. He knew he was looking into her soul. He knew she could not lie in that moment, but that she might tell the truth. Looking at him with those eyes almost killed his belief in purity. What were you to Oldring? He panted fiercely. I am his daughter, she replied instantly. Veneers let go of her. There was a violent break in the force of his feeling, then creeping blankness. What was it you said? He asked in a kind of dull wonder. I am his daughter. Oldring's daughter? Queried Veneers, with life gathering in his voice. Yes. With a passionately awakening start, he grasped her hands and drew her close. All the time you've been Oldring's daughter? Yes, of course, all the time. Always. But Bess, you told me... Let me think. I made out you were so ashamed. It is my shame, she said, with voice deep and full, and now the scarlet fired her cheek. I told you I'm nothing, nameless, just Bess, Oldring's girl. I know, I remember, but I never thought... He went hurriedly, huskily. That time when you lay dying, you prayed. Somehow I got the idea you were bad. Bad? She asked, with a little laugh. She looked up with a faint smile of bewilderment and the absolute unconsciousness of a child. Veneers gasped in the gathering might of the truth. She did not understand his meaning. Bess! Bess! He clasped her in his arms, hiding her face against his breast. She must not see his face in that moment, and he held her while he looked out across the valley. In his dim and blinded sight, in the blur of golden light and moving mist, he saw Oldring. She was the rustler's nameless daughter. Oldring had loved her. He had so guarded her, so kept her from women and men and the knowledge of life that her mind was as a child's. That was part of the secret, part of the mystery. That was the wonderful truth. Not only was she not bad, but good, pure, innocent, above all innocence in the world, the innocence of lovely girlhood. He saw Oldring's magnificent eyes, inquisitive, searching, softening. He saw them flare in amazement, in gladness, in love, and suddenly strain with a terrible effort of will. He heard Oldring whisper, and saw him sway like a log and fall. Then a million bellowing, thundering voices, gunshots of conscience, thunderbolts of remorse, dinned horribly in his ears. He had killed Bess's father. Then a rushing wind filled his ears like a moan of a wind in the cliffs. And Knell indeed. Oldring's Knell. He dropped to his knees and hid his face against Bess, grasped her with the hands of a drowning man. Oh, God, oh, God, oh, Bess, forgive me. Never mind what I've done, what I've thought, but forgive me. I'll give you my life. I'll live for you. I'll love you. Oh, I do love you, as no man has ever loved a woman. I want you to know, to remember that I fought a fight for you. However blind I was, I thought, never mind what I thought, but I loved you. I asked you to marry me. Let me have that to hug to my heart. Oh, Bess, I was driven, and I might have known. I could not rest nor sleep till I had this mystery solved. God, how things worked out. Byrne, you're weak, trembling. You talk wildly, cried Bess. You've overdone your strength. There's nothing to forgive. There's no mystery except your love for me. You have to come back to me. And she clasped his head tenderly in her arms and pressed it closely to her throbbing breast. End of chapter 18.